So who's really in charge of the internet? We like to think of it as this open, decentralized space for everyone, but is that really the case? In this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers and look at the physical, the logical, and the political forces that are all fighting for control of our digital world.
Okay, so let's start with how it feels. When you think of the internet, you probably picture the cloud, right? It seems totally abstract, almost magical. You send a message, you stream a show, and poof, it just appears. It feels weightless.
But here's the thing. That feeling is just a very clever illusion. The internet isn't a cloud, not at all. It has a real physical body, a massive, hidden machine made of cables and data centers and satellites. And if you want to know who controls the internet, you first have to understand that machine.
To really get a handle on who's in control, we need to break down how this global machine is even built. It's not just one thing. It's actually made up of three very different but interconnected layers. It goes from concrete and steel all the way up to politics and rules.
So think of it like this. At the very bottom, you've got the physical layer, the actual hardware. On top of that, there's a logical layer, which is basically the shared language, the code that makes all that hardware work together. And then at the very top, you have the governance layer. That's where people and governments decide how the whole thing should be run. Each one of these layers is a different kind of battleground for power.
So let's start with the physical stuff, the hardware. And the most critical part of it might not be what you think. It's not in the sky. It's deep down, on the bottom of the ocean.
Just look at that number, 99%. Let that sink in for a second. That means pretty much everything you do that crosses an ocean, your emails, your video calls, global financial trades, even military secrets, is traveling through these garden hose-sized fiber optic cables. The satellites we always see in movies, they handle less than 1% of all that traffic.
You know, a really great way to picture all this is to think of it like the circulatory system in a body. The giant undersea cables are the main arteries, pumping data between continents. The massive data centers are like the vital organs, processing and storing all that information. And the cable landing stations, these unassuming buildings on the coast, are like the tiny capillaries that connect this huge global network to our local ones. So we know these arteries are crucial, but here's where the story takes a huge turn. Who actually owns these arteries has changed, and it's changed dramatically. There's been a quiet revolution over the past decade that has completely reshaped the internet's backbone.
See, it used to be that these massive billion-dollar cable projects were just too expensive for any one company. So huge groups of telecom companies, the AT&Ts and Vodafones of the world, would all pool their money together to build them and then share the capacity.
But today, well, the situation is completely different. Just 4 companies, Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft, what we call the hyperscalers, now account for over 2/3 of all the traffic flowing through these critical cables. Think about what that means. They went from just being customers using the internet to becoming the primary owners of its most important infrastructure.
And just to be super clear, they're not just renting space anymore. Oh no, they are spending billions of dollars to build their own private globe-spanning cable networks. Projects like Google's Nuvem or Meta's Project Waterworth are built specifically to connect their own data centers, giving them this incredible amount of control over the physical flow of information. It's a huge strategic advantage. Okay, so owning the physical pipes is a massive piece of the puzzle. But control also exists at that next level up, the logical layer. It's not just about who owns the road, it's also about who gets to direct all the traffic.
The internet actually has this hidden hierarchy. Down at the bottom, you have Tier 3 providers. That's your local cable or phone company. They have to pay a bigger Tier 2 network for access to the wider internet. And that Tier 2 network often has to pay an even bigger Tier 1 network. These Tier 1s are the original giants of the internet backbone. Their networks are so huge they can connect to every other part of the internet without paying anyone. They were the ultimate gatekeepers.
And here's the big disruption. By building their own global networks, the hyperscalers are basically creating a whole new category. Some people are calling it Tier 0. They've built these private backbones that are so massive they don't need to pay the old gatekeepers. It's essentially a private internet running in parallel to the public one, mostly for their own traffic.
Now, while all of this is solidifying control on the ground and under the sea, a completely new physical layer is being built hundreds of kilometers right above our heads.
For years, satellite internet was famously slow and laggy. That's because the satellites were in what's called geostationary orbit, or GEO, which is super far away. The big game changer is low Earth orbit, or LEO. Constellations like Starlink or Amazon's Project Kuiper have satellites that orbit way, way closer to Earth, and that drastically cuts down the delay, making it feel almost as fast as broadband on the ground.
What these new systems do is create this resilient mesh network up in space that can bring high-speed internet to the most remote places on the planet. But are you noticing a theme here? This revolutionary new layer of infrastructure is also being built and controlled by the very same handful of giant tech corporations, concentrating control even further.
Now, all of this consolidation of hardware into private hands, well, it hasn't gone unnoticed, and it sets the stage for our final layer of control, the political one, where governments all around the world are now trying to reassert their own power.
The internet was originally built on this idea of a multi-stakeholder model. That meant technical experts, academics, companies, and governments all kind of worked together to set the rules. But a different model is gaining a lot of ground, a multilateral model, where governments, especially countries like China and Russia, are arguing that they should be the ones to have the final say over how the internet works inside their borders.
And this tension, it creates a very real risk of what people call internet fragmentation, or the Splinternet. The idea that we have one single global internet isn't guaranteed to last forever. We could be heading towards a future where there are dozens of separate national internets with digital walls between them, each with its own set of rules and restrictions.
Okay, so after looking at the physical pipes, the logical routing, and the political power plays, let's circle all the way back to that original question. Who really controls the internet?
Well, the reality is there's no single puppet master. Control is more like a constant shifting tug of war between these four major groups. You have the hyperscalers who own the physical backbone, the traditional tier ones who still act as major gatekeepers, the technical bodies that keep the whole thing speaking the same language, and of course national governments all trying to exert their own influence.
And this really gets to the heart of the matter for the future. The whole founding idea of the internet was about openness and decentralization. But we're seeing these two powerful forces pushing in the exact opposite direction. Consolidation of the hardware in the hands of a few companies, and fragmentation of the rules by individual governments. So the question is, can that original ideal even survive? The simple truth is that this story is far from over. The fight for what the internet is and what it will become is happening right now. On the ocean floor, in low Earth orbit, and in the halls of governments. The invisible lines of control are still being drawn.